What's also happening to the population and by the mid-1700s, or in the mid-1700s? It's getting bigger through the combination of immigration and natural birth rate. Remember, life expectancies have stabilized, and in a rural farming society, that tends to, you got to have children so they can work the farm, That's why you have children. It's not because you want to love children, it's because you want them to work as your manual labor on the farms. Therefore, remember, this is the great little average here. The average family has 8 children and 42 grandchildren. Lots of little rugrats.
Oh my God.
We are holding at 3, so we're not trying to catch up with the 1700 average.
Oh my God.
Let's see. You also have diversifying population. You have some new immigrant kind of waves coming in. You got Ireland. You got Scotland or Scots-Irish coming in, and you've got Germany here. Usually poor, and there were some Catholics, particularly from the Irish area, but even those, there were a lot of Protestants even mixed in there. The Scotch-Irish are mostly Protestants, and Germans were also Protestants as well. So. But it is a diversifying population. A lot moved. This is the Piedmont connection here. A lot of them moved to that Piedmont area, and by 1750, another one-third of colonists will live in that Piedmont area. So you got some nice one-third of imperial vessels, one-third living in the Piedmont here. By the way, the most popular gateway, Philadelphia, Charlestown. Charlestown, number 2, populated city. Philly, number 1. I think New York is number 3. Followed by Boston, I believe. As I mentioned, standard of living good. Slavery gets a little bit of a talk here. 5 times as many coming in the basically the first half of the 1700s than in all the preceding years combined. So obviously there's a big jump in slavery in the early 1700s. 20% of the colonies by mid-century. And there still is a large percentage of those, 15%, a significant percentage of slaves that are living in the north of Maryland. And by 1750, American-born slaves will outnumber those born in Africa in most areas. And remember, there's a big difference between the slavery of the Caribbean and here in the United States. Because the Caribbean are sort of siphoning off the top slaves and working them to death. And remember, the United States area is only getting, the colonial region is only getting about 5% of all slaves that are shipped to the New World. So they're typically getting, they're the least prestigious cash crop, and that leads to a fairly equal ratio male to female, which is going to lead to a very natural birth rate there. They are less harsh conditions than Caribbean, and there's a much longer survival rate there for the slaves. Still, there's the Stono Rebellion, 1739. That's where they try to make a run for Florida. Let's see. Rise of colonial elites. Remember, pretty much except in New England area, you've got domination by fairly wealthy planters. The only exception to that, again, is New England, where there are a lot of lawyers and doctors and people who get elected based on merit, but most other areas, the legislatures are dominated by the wealthy and elites. The other big factor here as we get towards the 1750s is a major philosophical advance in Europe that makes its way to the United States. It is known as the Enlightenment. It is where sort of human reason and science are sort of admired, and the big impact, particularly for the United States story, is this is a big political philosophy kind of. That's one of the big categories of the Enlightenment. There's some art stuff and other things going on, but that's the big impact in the United States there. John Locke, eventually we will adopt all of these in the Constitution, like John Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau and Voltaire and a lot of the philosophies there. The separation of powers comes from this era, and a number of different things there. Remember, this also breeds this reason translates into religion as well. And you've got the new religion, Enlightenment religion is known as. Anybody remember this one? Deism. And deists basically believe that when reason conflicts with the Bible, that reason should win out. It's sort of the idea that most deists believe sort of something along the lines that God created the universe and it's sort of a watchmaker analogy, and he sort of winds it up, creates natural laws, and just sort of took a hands-off approach and let things go. And that fits very well when you're a rational sort of Enlightenment thinker there. And of course, when 1 in 10 children below the age of 16 are killed in a diphtheria epidemic in 1737-38. It is, the alarmists basically are saying it's the deists that are causing this to happen, and we have the Great Awakening, which basically is a passionate Christian revivalism that sweeps the nation basically in the 1740s. Very fire and brimstone type stuff, like divine wrath has caused these things to happen. Corrupt humans, material comfort is bad, we're all going to hell, that sort of idea. Very emotional kind of stuff. Fiery preachers, Jonathan Edwards, William Tennant, George Whitefield, my favorite, Teddy Frelinghuysen. These guys are going to tour all over. They're going to go on tour, literally. You make the most money that way, going on tour. Not with your album sales, just kidding. But they do sort of tour the nation together and sort of espouse their beliefs into the average everyday people. Remember, New England is sort of a battleground area. You have the old lights versus new lights. Remember that one? The old lights are the rational clergy, sort of like the deist clergy, the deist-influenced clergy, and the new lights are sort of the passionate revivalists of the Great Awakening, and they literally have, battles might be a little bit of a harsh word, but Newtown is a battleground area. You have the preachers on one side of the meeting house, preaching across the street at the other guy where the Trinity Church now is. They're yelling at each other and sort of arguing about religion and stuff like that. Must be made for a fun Sunday in Newtown there. It does have some pretty big significance here. Remember, you've got some religions on the way down. There are some of your traditional American religions, like the Puritans, like the Quakers, like the Anglican religions. And on your way up, you have these sort of new Protestant religions, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, still the most popular religions in the United States today. You've got to train all these preachers in whatever religion they are, and each sort of religion or each sort of denomination sort of creates a nice little college, like Princeton, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, Dartmouth, all created during this time period, each with their, Princeton, those are the Presbys, the Columbia's the Anglicans, Brown are the Baptists, and so on. It does tend to attract some new, not really new members, but African Americans and Native Americans kind of really were receptive to some of the ideas here. Women also very receptive to a lot of these new denominations because they tend to be more accepting of women and even giving women the right to vote in some places. The other thing that it does is it sort of creates this sort of what's the word for it? Like sort of almost like this ecumenical feeling. Like all these guys are going on tour together despite being different religions. So as good old Teddy and William Tennant and Johnny Edwards are all, hanging out after they're preaching. They talk and they sort of gain some acceptance of one another. You can sort of envision that happening around the campfire. I'm making that part up, but you can kind of see it in your mind. So there's that. What's that?
That sounds like the making of a new Presbyterian.
Maybe next year. They'll email Greg and, you know, get it on, they'll tweet it out on the Foss quotes. Next phase is Road to Revolution. Remember that nice little timeline of events here. You've got King George's War and the Louisburg thing. The colonists voluntarily jumping in and taking out some Louisburg Canadians, beating them up a little bit. And then, of course, the sort of the event of change here, the sort of swing event is another war. The French and Indian, or the 7 Years' War. This is the one obviously taking place mostly in upstate New York in the Great Lakes area. And it's basically the French and Indians, it's not just a clever name. The French and Indians versus the English and the colonists. You know, as the British in the early going march off with their redcoats into the wilderness, they get annihilated by many Native Americans. The French and the Indians are winning pretty handily in the early couple of years there. And then William Pitt takes over military affairs, and he promises colonists that he will pay for the entirety of the war. The British will pay for the entirety of the war, reorganizes things. The British get together, they sort of get reacclimated here, and they end up winning, to make a long story short. And the Treaty of Paris of 1763 gave Britain all land east of the Mississippi River.
What year is that?
1763. It's nice because 1763, then 20 years later is the next Treaty of Paris that ends the American Revolution, so it's exactly 20 years apart. Spain cedes Florida to Britain, and then they will get it back later. So Britain is supreme in North America here. Bad for Native Americans because now there's no two powers to play off that they were doing before. They're sort of playing the British and the French off one another there, and they're at the mercy of these leeches, the colonists, who are just have this expansive, like what are the locusts they are pretty much moving west and infringing upon Native American territory here. And the colonists do this almost immediately, and the big problem is the British are like, all right, what's the big impact of the French and Indian War? The big one is
Did they give away
the war debt. And the British are like, whoa, they have this war debt, they know they're going to have to pay it off. The big problem becomes when Pontiac's Rebellion happens here, and because of this, the colonists infringing upon Native American territory, and the British are going to have to leave troops basically to defend these colonists. So the British do a couple of things. They send 10,000 British regulars to defend the British colonists. Remember, they're responsible for the colonial defense. But they also passed the Proclamation of 1763, which basically a do not cross line at the crest of the Appalachian Mountains to try to ease the tensions there, maybe try to do this. The problem is, this is going to continue to cost the British money, which they thought they were done with here. And that's going to sort of initiate the taxation thing and some other things.